I was told this is the happy room because all the electronics work in here, so we're going to try to keep it happy. Welcome to the site building room again, if you've had sessions in here. These sessions are going to be kind of more for beginners. We're going to talk about content strategy, some of the concepts. Just like any of these sessions, we can go into lots. And, I have half hour, 45 minutes or so to talk. So we're going to cover a lot of the basics for you all. I think some people probably do some type of content strategy in their work, whether they know they're actually doing content strategy or not. Yeah.
Did you want to have lights on?
Could you hit that? Which one is it?
You want the...
Awesome.
Or do you want those?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Perfect.
Cool.
Cool. Now the mood is set. So, like everything, I think we can drill into these subjects. My goal is to just cover the basics and make sure that we're laying a good foundation, a good framework for doing content strategy, just describe some definitions of some things. Just like a camp like this, there's probably all kinds of different experience levels. Some of you work for agencies, some of you work for universities, some of you work for companies, some of you work for yourselves, and maybe you're maintaining your own blog or archive or library of something. But at the crux of everything that we build, of course, no matter who you are, we're in the content game, right? So they're not called content management systems for nothing. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a business owner, digital strategist, UX designer, brand cultivator, marketer, husband, Chihuahua owner, as you can see, and a Zach Galifianakis body double. So don't confuse us. But Julia, my wife, who's speaking right next door, we're kind of having a little bit of a showdown right now, so I have to just quickly do a head count. Not that it's a competition. 16.
Not at all.
Okay, I'm getting nervous. Julia is speaking on search next door and really making a more powerful search with Drupal. And I'm speaking about content strategy. And my thought is, if you build a good enough content strategy, you don't need search. So it moots her discussion over there. But not really, of course. Sites need search, just like everything else. So what qualifies me to give a talk on content strategy? Well, I'm not a trained content strategist. I'm very much self-taught. I started a company, self-taught, got into web design, started my first agency job in web design, learned that as a web designer, we're supposed to put together some basic content outlines like information architecture diagrams. But I probably still at that point earlier on, talking about 10 years ago maybe, still didn't know probably what real true content strategy was. Of course, everything's changed. There's better tools now. The content management systems are maturing. So what I found for myself personally, and I think why it works for me is I found my own path, and a lot of the things that I've learned over time and making the same mistakes over and over and over again, you realize really why you need a good, sound content strategy. And once you start knowing what the definitions are, what the tools are, how to lay all that out, it starts affirming a lot of what you kind of understood the way things should work and the way that they should fall into place. And then I started Spry Digital with my wife and partner next door, and one other partner, Sheila Burkett. And really, when we started building that team and getting the input from the team, then we started really understanding truly what the impacts of not having sound content strategy were in place. And there's a very good reason why we spend a little time and a little energy and effort into putting a content strategy together. So I'm going to go into this. We all know this jerk. Some of us do, maybe. But there's a saying in the content world, content is king. And I'm not going to say that because it's overplayed, it's tired. Everyone says that. Every slide says that. So I'm just going to show a picture of this jerk, and we all know that bad things happen to kings sometimes, so we all know that saying, but truly content is very important, and we're going to go into that. And then you maybe have heard this slide as well. Content is everything. There's a lot of articles about there by content marketers who say content's everything. It's, you know, it's your company culture. It's the people that work for you. It's, you know, yeah, okay, I think that's kind of phooey. I mean, content is, right? It's pictures, it's words, it's video, it's files, it's how we're serving everything up. The reason I say that is because I take their meaning, but I don't want this to be an intimidating topic for anybody looking to delve into the world of this. And when you start speaking in terms like that, it kind of starts putting it in a mythical, kind of unobtainable thing. And content's very methodical. It makes a lot of sense. You know, if you approach it very logically, you can really get a good grasp on what content is. So even though I'm not going to have a slide for it, obviously I do have a slide for content is everything. Right? We all saw this monstrosity announced this week. Basically, content is for human consumption. And that's, you know, as opposed to saying content is everything, to me, content is really about the stuff that we want to consume. It's a salty, cheesy, chewy blend of entities working together to make a harmonious, flavorful experience that's, you know, that you can digest and feel satisfied when you're done putting it down, right? Just like this thing. So you definitely want to create content with your audience in mind. I think Pizza Hut definitely knows who their audience is when they come up with something like that. And create content that serves a purpose, obviously. You'd be surprised when, you know, over time when you hand off a content management system to a client, they take it and they run with it. And you have different departments and different owners and different people wanting to create content for their own interest. They own a portion of that domain. What happens over time is you find that a lot of content is being developed without really any purpose. It's purposeful to the content administrators in that area, but, you know, to your audience, taking a bigger picture, a bigger look at that, what is the meaning of the content that's on the site that we're serving up? So North describes it as content strategy is the process by which content is analyzed, sorted, constructed, and placed. Users come to a site for its content first and foremost. So it's the most important part of a site. Would we all agree with that?
Yes.
Awesome. So, you know, at the end of the day, we're in the content game. We're all doing different things to put a pretty bow on it, to make it prettier, to excite people. But at the end of the day, it's all about the content. So I encourage you to check out North, which is kind of interesting. They've put together kind of a framework of best practices for developing web properties. It is built on Moire, a dependency manager, so you have to do a bit to install it and get it running. But nonetheless, the site has some good thought about content strategy if you're interested in going to check it out. And one of the things this team has done at North is they've also developed intake.center. It's actually at the .center domain. So if you pull that up, what they also do is they give you a framework to start going in and defining some content types. And the first thing that you do, and I don't want to get too far down the road right now, but basically they give you a framework to which you start setting up what are their personas, audiences, what are the missions and the goals of the content, and then it starts actually laying out the content types. And they use schema.org for their content types. And again, they're all about universal standards. And so schema.org uses things that are commonly understood conventions for naming certain kinds of content types on the system, which I understand pieces of Drupal use as well. So why do we need content strategy? That's a good question. So some of the reasons that I explained earlier, we'll go into a little further. Drupal is really complex, right? And if we all work in Drupal, we all kind of know that right out of the gate. I think we all understand its benefit and that it's a beautiful, powerful system, but there's a lot of ways to skin a cat with any new project, right? And there's a lot of ways that you could build something out. So Drupal's a tremendous framework when you really know what you're building. And if you don't know what you're building, yes, you can go at it and you can start hacking and building some site functionality. And your developers are going to hate you when you come back and say you've changed the entire content model, or we're going to do certain things different ways. So, your designers and developers have put a considerable amount of time into building a Drupal site. Nobody wants to rebuild anything. We don't want to redo our views or anything like that. There's just, by that point, a lot of dependencies, and they're going to hate you when you keep coming back and saying, we've rethought the content this way. Right, Keith?
That's right.
So having your content figured out early can really save a lot of pain, with any content management system, of course. And I think Duncan is speaking to some CMS issues as well. But just having a good plan in place, measure twice, cut once, is definitely the way to go, particularly with Drupal. Another reason that you do content strategy, it really encourages conformity. And now, we're all taught not to conform, and the Microsoft ads say, be your own person and all that stuff. When it comes to content strategy, conformity is very important. It really aligns the team building the website. It aligns the vendor and the client. And what I mean by that is that everybody's talking the same language. We're all on the same page. We're all calling entities by the same name. And if you've ever done any kind of project management, you'll realize that so much of your energy and time is just reminding each other, are we even calling the same thing? Is it, are we referring to the same element here? And things get lost in translation and emails and phone calls. So first and foremost, it starts getting everybody on the same page. You're putting structure to things. That streamlines the whole process going forward. Also, we talked about the communication aid with the client. It just, you don't have to explain yourself over and over throughout the whole course of the project. It also creates a common language that you can share with your developers. So I think that's really important as well, and something that a personal lesson I've learned is you have to speak the developer language as well. And the developers need to understand the terminology that we're using for certain areas because they're wiring it all up and they need to understand what these dependencies are. And when you read something in documentation or requirements, you need to make sure it does map back to that development plan. So it gets everybody speaking the same language. I thought this is a great quote, and this is a great way to think about content and why you should do it. Here's one of the few effective keys to the design problem, the ability of the designer to recognize as many of the constraints as possible. His willingness and enthusiasm for working within those constraints of price, of size, of strength, of balance, of surface, of time, and so forth. And so Charles Eames, I think they knew what they were doing. Most designers that I know appreciate design constraints. It puts barriers on what you're designing, and it gets you there quicker when you understand that. So one of their beautiful masterpieces, the lounge chair, we talk about content really defining constraints. Content is probably the best design constraint there is. So when their designers, the Eames, went out to go design a lounge chair, say, or any one of their other beautiful pieces, they understood all of their design constraints. They knew their timelines and budgets. They knew the constraints of the materials that they were working with. And the Eames were obviously all about the materials. They developed the process for bending wood, veneer, molding fiberglass to create the shell chairs that you see as well. They understood really what was possible given the material that they had to work with and the constraints. So oftentimes, just like I mentioned, those materials and processes really inform the design itself. When you look at the lounge, the process of bending the wood obviously was a key piece in the definition of this product. They were wrapping it really around a human. And so, right, if you look at the rest of it, it kind of fills itself in. Nice leather, nice touch, but really the core of this chair is that piece of the process of defining a material and what you have to work with. So just like any design, content strategy is really about putting shape to something. Your team begins by developing the requirements. In their case, it's obviously, we have to design a chair. Who is it for? What's the audience? How much do they want to spend on a chair? What are the materials, et cetera, et cetera. When you start defining that content in a content strategy, the natural shape of our products emerge as well, so our digital products. And we're going to go into that. So, sometimes we're designing websites, sometimes we're designing web products where we don't have a traditional website architecture. We don't have the traditional menu. We're really designing a product where we have to express the value of that product in the content itself, in the interface of that product itself. And so having a good sound content strategy sometimes really does draw the shape of the products that we're building. So it's all about creating buy-in as well. So another reason that we do content strategy, it's collaborative. You're working with the clients themselves. You're working with your internal team. And anytime you do that, you get that automatic, well, I shouldn't say automatic. You get that understanding. You see the justifications of why decisions were made to go down a certain path with content, and it gets the team on the same page, and that's what creates buy-in. So, clients really appreciate that collaborative approach when you're defining the content process. I think content, it's funny because visual designers think that clients really get hung up on visual design, but I can tell you probably in my experience, clients get more nervous about their role in the content strategy than probably any other step. And why is that? That's because they know that they're going to have to be the most involved in that step of the process than any other step. So, when we're putting requirements together, when we're doing the design, we kind of go away for a little while and put our thoughts together and come back. Content strategy is like, no, we need this from you. We need to develop this with you in mind. Do you have a question?
No, I'm sure.
Okay, just making sure. So they get really nervous about what the content process is going to look like. Having meetings with them, describing what your process is going to look like, really puts them at rest, puts them at ease. They understand the justifications for certain decision paths, and hopefully by that point they're on board. And again, when you get the content strategy in place, it kind of makes everything else flow from that. And so getting that early buy-in is very, very key. And again, they're working their full-time jobs. This is just something that they have to do on top of their jobs, so we're very conscientious of that, but we have to make it as easy and painless for them as possible. And so the face-to-face meetings, setting up certain tools that really help the efficiencies and the collaboration process, these are all things that, as easy as you can make the job of working with a client and developing their content strategy, you're going to benefit in the long run. So, who does the content strategy in an organization? That is a lesson that we've learned, and I think for a small agency like ourselves, we're just under 20 people. When you started selling the web work, you're thinking about the product, you're thinking about the design, all those aspects of it. You're thinking about content, but I think when you're a smaller company, you don't always think of resourcing those kinds of things. It just seems like, it would be nice for every project to do a brand strategy and to do, a brand identity standards guideline, thing like that. But the truth of the matter is you don't always have that luxury. Budgets, are set to where they're set at. So you don't always think of putting somebody in charge for doing the content strategy. But guaranteed at some point, somebody in that organization is going to have to figure this stuff out. Because when you don't, you're going to realize it later, and you're going to be like, darn, I wish we'd thought of that earlier on in the phase. So who can actually do the content strategy? It can really be anybody. The owner, stakeholder of the product, just depending on how your organization is set up. It might be the person who's owning that project. It might be the project manager involved. Maybe they have the most communication with the client. They're in kind of the better place to put kind of at least initial thoughts together as far as what the content strategy is going to look like. There's a big role in the UX design, the user experience design for content strategy. Oftentimes, if there is an exercise with a user experience design, that person is certainly thinking about the content strategy as well. In some roles and some organizations, obviously, there are specifically content strategists. Usually the bigger shops have more dedicated people who throw resources to that. It can be a copywriter, and copywriters are not always content strategists and vice versa. They can do the same role, but copywriters sometimes is all about just like directions set, now, create really beautiful crafted language. But really anybody, again, in the content strategy role can do the strategy, in some aspect of the strategy. Any questions so far? Cool. Yes, he had to pop up, right? He had to do it. So, truth of the matter is, don't wait for somebody in your organization to tell you to do it. Do your content strategy. Whatever your role is, whether it's designer, developer, project manager, if there is nobody else thinking about it, do it for yourself, if not for everybody else, right? Think about these things. Think about the structure of it. And what I just said previously is, don't delay the decisions for later on, what can be answered today. Because at some point, those things are going to arise and they have to be answered. Where is this? Which silo is this content going to live in? How do I navigate to it? And trust me, I know there's always fringe cases with content. There's always, well, that's not really treated like everything else here. Figure that out. Figure out where that's going to live and where people expect to find that information. So again, small agencies, oftentimes it's not sold. You don't have that strategy. Champion it for yourself or champion it within the organization. It's hard to tell business owners and project managers that you're going to spend the extra time up front figuring these things out, but really at the end of the day, it really does speed up design and development for the reasons I'm going into. So when are you supposed to do content strategy? Well, obviously we encourage you to do it as early as possible. Certainly before touching any visual design. I go into a client, maybe a sales meeting or a kickoff meeting, and everyone's excited and everyone's throwing ideas at into the ring. And you're like, yes, it can be this and it can be this. It's an energizing time and everybody loves the new relationship and it's kind of like the honeymoon period of dating. And so people are throwing a lot of ideas into the ring. It's a great idea to start tackling your content strategy while all those ideas are fresh in the mind. Yes, you can take the best notes, you can record it, but I think as much of it is about capturing that energy and putting those thoughts down as early as possible. And when you do that, it also tells the client you've definitely heard them and you've listened to them and that you've accounted for everything at this phase. I say do it with the UX design team. And so, again, it might be the UX designer on the project. But if there is a content strategist or somebody thinking about content, be in the discussions at least about strategy, okay? About the design of things, because they do inform each other. Hear what the design constraints are. Hear what the limitations of the CMS are. Hear what you're able to do with a given project. Work with the developers. Develop that stuff together as a team. You're going to be better off with it. Of course, not everybody has that luxury. But I think if you do, working with different disciplines as you put together that content strategy is going to help you define things as well, because you will quickly find out in a group setting what you're not going to be able to achieve. There's going to be a developer or somebody go, that's, it's doable, but it's complex. And, to understand those things is important when you're doing content strategy. Again, it goes back to the constraints of the project. So, I think of it like an 80-20 rule. Certainly do 80% of it up front as much as you can. Try to account for every fringe case. Even trying to account for product pages that don't exist yet or areas that don't exist yet. Knowing that you have to design a platform that's scalable is going to be really key. to the best that you can. You know, sometimes you know that things are going to be in a later phase, or they're coming down the road, or the client is taking on a new line of service or business. You know you're going to be folding something else into this content strategy. So try to account for that as much as possible. But as we're going to talk about, it's really good to be agile, and it's really good to be engaged throughout the entire phase of the work, because look, we all like to think, you know, whatever comes out of our heads magically, you know, is put down, and that's the Bible, and everybody follows that. But really, putting content into real world, you know, we start noticing some things. We start saying maybe that's not the best pattern, maybe that's not the best solution for that, and then we can work around that. You can be agile. Don't try to approach your content strategy completely agilely. I think you're asking for trouble. Be flexible, but try to plan for as many of those situations up front as possible. So what's our approach? Again, these are things that I've learned, and these are things, maybe some tools that we use. If there are any other people who handle content strategy in the room, you certainly are going to have your own tools and processes, but these are things that kind of I've morphed into and kind of understood, and how it works particularly with our team at Spry Digital. So the first thing you're going to do is really take a content inventory of everything that exists. When you're doing a content inventory, you want to jump into it. You just want to start making lists and all that. But what's really important, because we're talking about strategy, right? We're still talking about content strategy, not doing. So we definitely want to take a step back and even identify what are the goals of the content strategy. There can be completely different goals on why you're collecting the content that you are. It's going to inform what areas of the site you're doing an inventory of. If it's a huge site, thousands of pages, maybe the client has a more short-term pain point, and they want you to focus maybe on a certain area of their business or site. Or you're looking at things like usability tests. Maybe you're doing strategy for usability concerns. Maybe you're doing strategy for SEO concerns. Whatever that is, you're going to be looking at this raw data somewhat differently with a different lens on. So start defining what your goals are going to be and what your metrics are going to be and what you hope to get out of doing a content inventory for that client, because it's going to bring focus to this entire exercise when you start putting the, because it can be overwhelming. On big sites, there's a lot of fields, there's a lot of content. If you remember always why you're doing what you're doing, it can bring some focus to that process. So, you know, keep it raw. This data at this point is just raw data. We're plucking things out of a CMS or on a website, and we're simply documenting it, probably into a spreadsheet or something to that effect. Why is it valuable to do a content inventory? Because like I said earlier, I think many cases when CMSs are kind of turned loose in the wild, there's a point where clients don't even realize what the content is on their site anymore. They'd be shocked to see pages and nodes and articles and, you know, videos that are just not relevant anymore. It lets them take a fresh approach, as you're doing with their content, but it also is documenting it for them. It helps them see the big picture as well. And it also, again, by putting any documentation down like this, it helps justify the decisions that you're making and you're reaching as a team as well. And again, that's a document you can go back to throughout the course of the project and refer to it. And when you don't have that, what are we talking about? We're talking about very nebulous ideas, and we think that's a beast over there, but we really don't have any proof of what we're documenting here. So again, it's just further clarifying and putting into pictures what the true story is. So just like I talked about the focus and the goals of the content inventory, these are a lot of fields that you can look at when you're doing a content inventory. We might be looking at, well, we have to track the content ID because that's going to be the identifier. What's the title of the page? What's the URL, headings, the file formats of those documents, who owns it, who's the author. Actually, where's the physical location? So necessarily, where does it live in the CMS or on another server, et cetera, because then we can start, again, thinking about the architecture and the bigger picture. Meta descriptions are very important, meta keywords. SEO titles, that might be a separate field that you're looking at versus your main titles. And if those don't exist, you can put that into your content strategy and say, okay, these are your headings today. These are maybe what your SEO title should be of the page. Categories and tags, dates that they're created, revised, access. That might give you a clear picture of how much that content kind of has to be a living, breathing thing, how many edits there are to it. Redirects as much as possible. Again, most of the time when you're doing a content inventory, you're either consolidating information or you're somehow cleaning up that experience. So there's going to be a lot of redirects, pages folding into each other. You kind of have to track that as well. Sometimes doing a screenshot is great of every page, just so you have a record of what it looked like at any given point. And then maybe you're looking at the analytics as well. So if SEO is a part of this exercise, go ahead and put some SEO metrics into that content inventory as well and put it right there in the list item for that page. You know, how many unique page views, return visitors, time on that page, etc. That could really paint a clear picture for you. And you don't necessarily have to do it yourself, although this is beautiful work for an intern to do. But there are tools that can help you do this as well. So sometimes you can do a CMS export, and it will give you some data that you can look at. There are crawlers that help you pull the contents and do a deep index of your website. You can use something like the content analysis tool that for a relatively small fee, they'll actually do a pretty deep crawl of your website and give you a report on those things. And again, what you're going to collect is really going to depend on those goals. So again, very much raw data that comes out, especially from those exports. You're going to have to massage it a little bit. You're going to have to paint a clearer picture for it, because usually what you see on that page, it's not meaningful, right? And everything we're trying to do is provide context to our team and also provide context to our clients, of course. So taking that raw data, you just want to format a little bit. You want to put some shape to it. So this is maybe what a traditional content inventory spreadsheet looks like. And it just starts laying out what all the sections are, what the levels of navigation are, which are clearly marked by color coding. Again, where the links are. So even if you're referring to this, you always have quick links to jump to that page and make a reference to it. The URLs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Any one of those fields that you want to collect on this. Only when you've done this can you really share that and really start discussing anything meaningful, because now you start seeing kind of the structure of things, and you can start making informed decisions about, you know, maybe SEO impacts. You can see right away that these headings are not optimized, that you can, you know, take another stab at these and go at it. Maybe you can quickly identify that your permalink structure is all wrong, both from a hierarchy standpoint and maybe from an SEO standpoint as well. So just having it laid out like this, it gives you a really quick, clear picture of where the problems may exist in your content architecture. So then you have decisions to make, obviously. So, you know, you've gotten a kind of a clear picture of the inventory. Now, what are you going to do? What are the goals? Again, track everything back to what are the goals of this process. So what pages are getting removed, maybe? They're not relevant anymore. They're redundant with other pages that have been created, or you're merging them into one. What pages are needing to be revised? There's either new content, maybe there's a new brand tone, and you have to take a look at the content on the page from just a brand voice perspective, and you have to infuse it with a little more personality. Maybe you haven't factored for responsive design, and that's going to be a big theme that we keep discussing here, because you really have to take a fresh look at all the content within a site architecture and really understand, is it going to be able to be ported over if you're building a new mobile responsive website for a client? Does it make sense in the form that it is to even move over at that point? And I also identifying what content needs to be written in to fill the gaps. So, you know, oftentimes a client's going to know, or a team's going to know, an internal team is going to know where the gaps exist in their content structure, right? They've lived with their site now for a few years maybe. They've heard the feedback from clients. This area is hard to find. Our teams are identifying that resources are difficult to find. There's too many steps to get to certain kind of content. So we're going to start identifying those things as well. What content do we need to create to fill in those gaps? what content is really getting migrated or moved over? This is a big one because content migration takes up a pretty healthy chunk of any budget. Are we just going to blankly say, hey, we're moving everything over, and we're going to throw a bucket of hours to say everything's going to get moved over, and whatever condition that content is in, it's going to be the same way when we port it over to the new website. And obviously that's not a good approach, right? You wouldn't do that if you were moving your house. You would take a look at the crap that's in your basement and say, that's going in the trash, or I'm giving it to the cousin or something like that who needs a bed. And your developers really need to understand what content's migrating over. It's going to save them a lot of hassle and headache as well. If content is not worth anything to anybody at that point, don't bother moving it over. So, you know, I think a lot of people are afraid of SEO impacts and ramifications of not having as much content as we once had on our site. If it doesn't mean anything to anybody, it's probably not yielding a lot of great results anyway from an SEO perspective. You have to look at that, and you know, part of doing that SEO audit is by saying, you know what, this page that really we think doesn't mean anything to anybody actually is drawing quite a bit of traffic to our website. We have a few articles that amazingly still generate an ungodly amount of traffic, even though they're slightly kind of irrelevant by this point, but they're still the terms that people are looking for. So you have to make those informed decisions, but as a general rule of thumb, if nobody owns it, if nobody cares whether that content moves or not, just flat out make a decision. Clean house at this point. You're going to get better loading sites. You're going to get, you know, less bloat. You don't have to account for them in your information architecture. It just cleans everything up, which is always a good move. So once we've done the information content inventory, sometimes we lead with this, right? So sometimes we're building a new product or a new website, and we don't have anything to go on previously. Content modeling is the notion of you're starting to build a large project from very many small parts. And so when I said, you know, you leave that kickoff meeting with full of energy, full of zeal, you want to go put your thoughts down, start defining what the site can be. It's a great idea to start, we call it like domain shaping or modeling. It's kind of like at the highest level of this product or website, what are going to be the primary content types? A calendar, you know, enrollment forms, you know, whatever it may be, a video channel, et cetera, et cetera. And you're not putting definition to these things just yet. You're just basically listing out all the types of content that are going to live on your site and get it down. It's just like creating an outline. When you do that, then you can start having the discussion about what are the priorities on the site. And you can say, based on the audience, based on budget and scope, and again, all those constraints, going back to that, then we can decide what are the priorities of the site. Sometimes this informs minimum viable product when we're building a new product or a web product for somebody. We can say, you know what, this site, this product could be this, but by prioritizing and focusing, it helps us get to MVP faster. It helps us bring more clarity and more vision and focus for our team as well, what we're building. Then you can approach it agilely. I'm definitely a believer that, you know, start with the simple tasks and knock out some wins and get some successes, and then figure out other ways of folding in more content. But it's good to at least account for all those things and have a deck of cards of all these different content types, because then over time you can kind of go back and re-explore that, find out whether that's still a priority. Things change. Companies pivot. Maybe it's entirely new content types, and the ideas that we discussed previously are not warranted anymore. So when you do this step, though, think of the system. And systematic people, logical people, love information architectures because it's logical, right? And you're creating a system for yourself to meet all future content needs, hopefully. The information architecture, taking that a step further then, this starts creating the hierarchy, the organization on the website. You've identified what all the pieces are. Now you have to start chunking it up into pages and areas of the site. You have to understand what the user journey is going to be through the website and through the product. And you have to start laying out content that's going to really make sense to a user. What's great about information architecture, this is really where all the context comes in. So previously we were just kind of like brain dumping and putting all our ideas on the table. Now we're really starting to put some context to things, starting to group pages, what makes sense contextually based on them as an audience, maybe the roles that we want them to have or the actions we want them to take on the website. And if you've seen an IA diagram, it basically looks like a big, glorious sitemap that's color-coded. It has some definition. I apologize, it's kind of fuzzy. You might have some links in there to start defining what it looks like, but this is all part of that step in bringing some clarity and vision, because now we can really see what the true effort's going to be of this content structure and where things are going to live and be siloed in this. And this is also very helpful to your developers because they can start really understanding. For example, we can color code what specific templates certain pages are going to be needing. So when we start designing templates for the website, the developer just instantly knows this is a child page, it's going to maybe use a 2-column layout, et cetera, et cetera. The wireframes. So I wouldn't say that the role of a content strategist necessarily is doing wireframes, but I think it helps to think about the wireframes in the context of the content strategy. And this is where working with that UX designer really comes into play. You don't have to do the wireframes, but if you can look at what your content strategy is doing to fit inside of a wireframe, you can kind of understand what shape it's going to take, and you'll probably quickly identify where it's not going to work and where you may have to pivot and put some new structure to it. So Karen McGrain from A Book Apart, she's a content strategist. She thinks about responsive design a lot. She wrote a great article in defense of lorem ipsum. You had a lot of content strategists for a while saying, lorem ipsum Greek has no place in our wireframes. We have to show real examples of content in there. But when you do that, I guarantee clients are going to start focusing on the language and not the layout, which is the role of the wireframe. We want them to be focused on the layout. So when you start dropping content in here, I'd say the role of a content strategist is your system of content being maintained? Is everything represented? Is the navigation represented? Are all the read more links there, and et cetera? And just make sure that's being maintained. But certainly use lorem ipsum where it makes sense, because we want the client to be focused on that. And just a few content considerations. What defines success in your content strategy? Always be doing that for anything that you do in your organization. Metrics for success are very important. Keeping your content on brand is also very key. Make sure everything that's being developed is on brand. That's very tricky with clients sometimes who are developing their own content. As a content strategist, you have to give them guidelines and structure for what they have to be creating if they're doing it themselves. And hopefully you have a relationship where you can chime in and go, we've noticed that's not on brand. The goal of this area, remember, is to communicate this, and we think it's missing on these points. Responsive web design. I'll just say this because we're getting a little strapped on time, but you'll have a lot of companies who hear responsive web design, mobile optimization. Google Mobilegeddon is the thing, it's the beast. We need to make our site mobile responsive. They often think you can take a desktop experience and start making some mobile viewports and just take all the content that already exists and shoehorn it and cram it into a responsive view. And we know that's not going to work. It might work for some pages, but you're going to run into a lot of trouble and a lot of headaches when you architect your content that way. It's a much better approach. I think it's saving costs when you can take a fresh look at all of the content throughout a site, or at least a main area of the site, and understand how it's going to work responsively. It also helps you prioritize the content that you're putting on those pages. Tools. The tools of our trade are going to be really important to communicate to our clients. Again, they have anxiety about this process already. You need to share with them the tools that we're going to use to make this easier so that they're on board, it's collaborative, you get that buy-in. And some of the tools that we use is a car, although I don't have a BMW. Face-to-face meetings are fantastic. Get in front of them, discuss these issues in front of them. There's nuances in content strategy that don't happen over airwaves. Keynote is a great item because you're presenting everything in a deck anyway, but it's also a good drawing tool if you have to quickly mock up content architectures and show the relationships of content. Basecamp, communication is really key. So when you can't meet face-to-face, you have a good platform at least to kind of facilitate some of that communication. Excel, because you already saw the content spreadsheets. I don't like laying out content in Excel because I think it lacks a certain context. But certainly for those content inventories, it makes sense to dump things in there. and then a few other tools that we use, Slack for your internal communications. And tools that we've been using lately are Jump Chart and Gather Content. Has anybody ever played with either of those tools? Okay. They're nice, and they help you develop that content strategy because you know, I'm not going to mess with this view at this point because I think we are strapped for time. But check those two tools out if you do anything regarding content. Jump Chart is a web collaborative tool where it lets you lay out the pages of your website. It gives you a WYSIWYG where you can actually start formatting the outline of your content within that tool. It has workflow approvals. You can share that page with your client and get approval on that particular page. You can upload your wireframes to that content page outline as well, so they can see the wireframe to your content outline. And it just helps kind of build that buy-in. Gather Content, which is a newer tool to come along, it's an English company. We've started using this in our workflow almost exclusively. And if you work with content management systems, you know that websites do not merely consist of WYSIWYG editors, right? They consist of these content types and form fields and all of these things. Gather Content lets you very easily chunk out the different content types that are going to live on your site. You give them definitions, you create templates, you associate your pages to those templates, and it automatically builds your information architecture for you based on those things. From a client perspective, they have workflow where they can assign certain people on their team certain pages, and the client can actually start going into the tool and populating their content while you're out designing and building your website, which is terrific. Now you wonder how that works. Well, you're able with Gather Content to put in field limits. You can put guidelines on every piece of content. So you're explaining that context and you're giving your clients what the purpose of this field is. They can start populating it. And then it has really tremendous export tools directly into popular content management systems like Drupal, where you actually map the fields from Gather Content directly into your Drupal database. So it's pretty slick like that, and it can really speed a lot of things up. And what's nice is it's very easy. It's a lot easier to change the content types there if we identify a problem than to do that back in the Drupal site. I'll just wrap it up really quickly. Again, the challenges of content strategies. You're a small organization. You don't have somebody in charge of doing it. You're working with clients that are siloed. You have different owners. You have governance problems where different people own different parts of the site. You have to get them all on the same page with the content strategy. You really have to understand the abilities of the CMS and who's building it and what you can do. You have to speak the developer language, make sure they're on the same page, and keeping clients engaged. I have a few resources. I shared the North and Intake Center with you all. Usability.gov has a really good set of guidelines for developing things like information architecture and content strategies. It's nicely designed as well. It's one of the best things the government's done, in my opinion. So check them out. Schema.org that I already mentioned, you can check out their conventions for naming content fields. Content Insight is the tool, the content inventory tool. And Karen McGrain, if you haven't read her articles about content strategy in a responsive world, definitely check out her stuff as well. Voila. Are there any questions, thoughts, personal struggles with content? Yeah?
You're going to put your slides on the Drupal camp
Absolutely.
site?
Everything's going to be shared, and well, the video as well.
You kind of loaded us with a lot of links right at the end there. It'd be great to get those.
Yeah, I know. Time tends to get away from me. It's a common problem. Okay. Thanks, everybody, and have a good remaining Drupal camp.
Thank you.